The sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty plains of New Mexico Territory, 1877, as Dahlia Wilson squinted at the distant figure slumped beneath the lone cottonwood tree. She'd been tracking him for 3 days now, following hoofprints that meandered erratically across the desert landscape, sometimes disappearing altogether before reappearing miles away. Her heart hammered in her chest as she approached, recognizing the broad shoulders and sun-bleached hat of the man who had saved her life just months before and then vanished without a trace. Dahlia urged her mare forward, dust billowing around them as they closed the distance to the cottonwood. The man didn't stir at her approach, which sent a chill down her spine despite the blistering heat. Dismounting quickly, she rushed to his side, her skirts gathering the red desert dust. "Ryker," she whispered, kneeling beside the motionless figure. The cowboy's eyes fluttered open, fever bright in his weathered face. Recognition dawned slowly in his gaze, followed by a ghost of a smile that made Dahlia's heart skip. "You came," he rasped, his voice parched from thirst and illness. Dahlia reached for her canteen, gently lifting his head to help him drink. "I always would," she replied, her voice steady despite the fear clutching at her throat. She had no idea how long he'd been lying here or what had brought the strongest man she'd ever known to such a state. What she did know was that Roswell was still a half-day's ride away, and Ryker Reed was burning with a fever that could claim his life before they ever reached it. The journey that had led Dahlia to this moment had begun 6 months earlier, when she'd stepped off the stagecoach in Roswell with nothing but a small trunk of possessions and a letter of introduction to her late father's friend, Dr. Thomas Green. The New Mexico Territory was a far cry from her Boston upbringing, but after losing both parents to influenza and finding herself at the mercy of relatives who viewed her as little more than a burden, the opportunity to assist the aging doctor had seemed like providence. Dahlia had been prepared for the dust, the heat, and the primitive conditions of frontier life. What she hadn't been prepared for was the lawlessness that seemed to permeate the very air of the territory, or how quickly her life would become entangled with that of a mysterious cowboy with eyes the color of a summer storm. Now, as she assessed Ryker's condition, she knew she had to get him to shelter. The midday sun was unforgiving, and though the cottonwood provided some relief, it wouldn't be enough. "Can you stand?" she asked, already sliding her arm beneath his shoulders. Ryker attempted to rise, his powerful frame shaking with effort. "I can try," he managed, teeth gritted against obvious pain. Together they struggled to get him to his feet. Dahlia could feel the heat radiating from him through his shirt, which was stiff with dried sweat and what appeared to be blood on one side. "You're wounded," she said, quickly examining the dark stain spreading across his ribs. "It's nothing," he mumbled, though his complexion had gone ashen with the effort of standing. "Don't lie to me, Ryker Reed. Not now." Dahlia's voice was firm as she helped him toward her horse. "We need to get that wound cleaned and your fever down. There's an old line shack about 2 miles east of here if I've got my bearings right. Can you make it that far?" Ryker nodded grimly, his jaw set with determination. "Been through worse." Dahlia doubted that, but she kept her thoughts to herself as she helped him onto her mare. She would lead the horse on foot, adding her weight might be too much for the animal in this heat. "What happened to your horse?" she asked as they set off, Ryker swaying slightly in the saddle. "Rustlers," he replied after a long moment. 3 days back, got my horse, nearly got me too." Dahlia's grip tightened on the reins. "The Delgado gang," Ryker's silence was answer enough. The Delgado brothers had been terrorizing the territory for months, stealing cattle and horses, burning homesteads, and leaving few survivors. Sheriff Parker had organized posses, but the gang always seemed to be one step ahead, disappearing into the vast landscape only to emerge elsewhere to continue their reign of terror. "You went after them alone, didn't you?" Dahlia couldn't keep the accusation from her voice. Again, Ryker didn't answer, but his shoulders tensed visibly. "That's what I thought," she muttered, frustration warring with worry. "You're the most stubborn, reckless man I've ever known." A weak chuckle escaped him. "That why you tracked me down, to tell me that?" Dahlia looked up at him, taking in his feverish eyes and the pain etched into his features. I tracked you down because you disappeared without a word 6 weeks ago, because people in Roswell care about you, Ryker. Because she stopped herself, not ready to voice the feelings that had been growing inside her since the day he'd rescued her from the overturned stagecoach. The old line shack appeared on the horizon like a mirage, weathered boards bleached almost white by years of relentless sun. Dahlia quickened her pace, eager to get Ryker out of the heat and assess his wounds properly. Inside, the shack was stifling but at least offered shelter from the sun. A rickety table, one chair, and a narrow cot with a straw mattress were the only furnishings. Dust covered every surface and Dahlia spotted a snake skin in one corner, but it would have to do. With considerable effort, she managed to help Ryker onto the cot. He was barely conscious now, his breathing labored. Dahlia worked quickly, removing his shirt to reveal the angry wound on his side. It wasn't a gunshot as she'd feared, but a deep knife slash that had become infected. The edges were puffy and red, and yellowish fluid seeped from it. Drawing on everything she'd learned from Dr. Green, Dahlia set to work. She cleaned the wound with water from her canteen, then retrieved a small medical kit from her saddlebag. The doctor had insisted she carry it on her journey to find Ryker, a fact for which she was now immensely grateful. "This is going to hurt," she warned as she uncorked a bottle of whiskey, also courtesy of Dr. Green. Ryker's eyes opened briefly. "Do what you must," he murmured. The whiskey splashed over the wound and Ryker's entire body tensed, a strangled sound escaping his throat. Dahlia worked methodically, cleaning away the infection and applying a poultice of herbs she'd gathered along the trail. Throughout it all, Ryker remained stoically silent, though sweat beaded on his forehead and his breathing came in sharp gasps. When she'd done all she could for the wound, Dahlia turned her attention to his fever. She used the remainder of her water to dampen a cloth, wiping it over his face and chest in an attempt to cool him. His skin burned beneath her touch, and she knew the fever hadn't broken yet. "You need to rest," she told him, though she wasn't sure if he could hear her anymore. His eyes had closed again, his breathing shallow but steady. "I'm going to find more water and something to eat. I'll be back soon." Dahlia hesitated, reluctant to leave him alone in this condition. But without water, they wouldn't last long, and she was certain she'd seen a small creek not far from the shack. Decision made, she checked her pistol, another gift from Dr. Green, who had insisted no woman should travel the territory unarmed, and stepped out into the punishing heat. The creek was indeed where she remembered, about a quarter-mile from the shack. Dahlia filled her canteen and a small pot she'd found in the shack, then searched the surrounding area for anything edible. She was rewarded with a patch of prickly pear cactus, the fruits ripe and ready for harvesting. She gathered as many as she could carry, careful of the small spines that could embed themselves in her skin. On her way back, Dahlia spotted a jackrabbit and, after a moment's hesitation, drew her pistol. She'd never been a particularly good shot, but at this distance. She squeezed the trigger, the report echoing across the empty landscape. To her surprise, the rabbit fell. It wasn't a clean kill, and Dahlia felt a pang of remorse as she put the suffering animal out of its misery, but the meat would help Ryker regain his strength. Back at the shack, Ryker hadn't moved, but his breathing seemed more regular. Dahlia set about making a small fire outside with dried brush and what little wood she could find. She prepared a simple stew with the rabbit and some dried beans and jerky from her supplies, then turned her attention to the prickly pears, carefully removing the spines before slicing them open to reveal the sweet, juicy flesh inside. The sun was setting by the time she returned to Ryker's side with a cup of broth. His eyes opened as she approached, clearer than before though still glazed with fever. "You're still here," he said, sounding surprised. Dahlia helped him sit up enough to drink the broth. "Of course I am. I told you I would be. Thought I might have dreamed you." His voice was stronger now, though still rough. "Wouldn't be the first time." Dahlia's hands stilled. "You've dreamed of me." A ghost of Ryker's usual smile tugged at his lips. "More times than I care to admit." Warmth that had nothing to do with the desert heat spread through Dahlia's chest. "Drink your broth, Mr. Reed." she said, trying to sound stern though she couldn't quite suppress her own smile. You need your strength. Ryker complied, finishing the entire cup before sinking back onto the thin mattress. How did you find me? He asked, his voice already growing drowsy again. Dahlia set the cup aside. That's a story for when you're stronger, she said. For now, you need to rest. But Ryker caught her wrist as she began to rise, his grip surprisingly strong despite his weakened state. Thank you, he said, his eyes holding hers, for coming after me. Dahlia's throat tightened with emotion. I always would, she repeated softly. His eyes drifted closed, but he didn't release her wrist, and Dahlia didn't pull away. She sat beside him as night fell, listening to his breathing even out as he slipped into what she hoped was healing sleep. The stars appeared one by one in the vast desert sky, brilliant and countless in a way they never were in Boston. Dahlia watched them through the shack's single window, thinking about the twisted path that had led her here, to this moment, sitting beside a feverish cowboy in the middle of nowhere. She'd come to the New Mexico territory seeking escape and purpose. What she hadn't expected to find was Ryker Reed, or the way he would append her carefully constructed plans for a quiet, independent life. Their first meeting had been dramatic, the stagecoach overturning when a wheel broke on the rough road just outside Roswell, trapping Dahlia and the other passengers inside as raiders approached. Ryker had appeared like something out of a dime novel, driving off the attackers with precise shooting and then freeing the passengers from the wreckage. He'd personally escorted Dahlia to Dr. Green's house, tipping his hat before riding away without even giving his name. It was the doctor who'd identified him as Ryker Reed, a former Texas Ranger who now worked as a scout and occasional deputy when Sheriff Parker needed extra help. A good man, Dr. Green had said, though he carries more ghosts than most. Over the following months, Dahlia had encountered Ryker frequently in the small town of Roswell. He came by the doctor's office for supplies or treatment of minor injuries. Sometimes, he escorted patients from outlying ranches and homesteads. Once he brought in a young cowhand with a broken leg, carrying the boy on his horse for 15 miles after a fall during a cattle drive. Each time, Dahlia found herself more drawn to the quiet cowboy with the watchful eyes and rare smile. They'd shared conversations over coffee at the town's only restaurant, and once he'd escorted her to a dance at the newly built schoolhouse, though he'd steadfastly refused to participate in the dancing himself. Then, 6 weeks ago, he'd vanished. No goodbye, no explanation. Sheriff Parker mentioned offhandedly that Ryker had gone to track cattle rustlers, but when days turned to weeks with no word, Dahlia had grown increasingly concerned. It was Dr. Green who finally suggested she go after him. That man's not going to come back on his own, the doctor had said with the wisdom of his 70 years. Too stubborn by half and convinced he's not worthy of happiness, but I've seen the way he looks at you, Dahlia, and I've seen the way you look at him. Sometimes folks need a little push toward what's good for them. So Dahlia had set out, armed with the doctor's medical kit, a detailed map of the territory, and the determination to find Ryker Reed and bring him back, or at least discover why he'd left. Now, as she watched him sleep, his face peaceful for the first time since she'd found him, Dahlia wondered what would happen when he recovered. Would he disappear again? Or could she convince him to return to Roswell, to consider putting down roots, to explore whatever was growing between them? Morning brought a slight improvement in Ryker's condition. His fever had decreased somewhat, and the wound looked less angry when Dahlia changed the poultice. He was able to eat a small breakfast of prickly pear and jerky, washing it down with the fresh water Dahlia had collected at dawn. We should head for Roswell today, he said as Dahlia packed away the meager breakfast remains. It's not safe out here with the Delgados still roaming. Dahlia shot him a skeptical look. You're in no condition to travel. I've ridden with worse, Ryker insisted, though the effort of sitting upright had left him pale and sweating. Yes, and look where that got you, Dahlia retorted. Another day of rest and then we'll see. Ryker opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again, apparently recognizing the determination in her eyes. You're as stubborn as a mule, you know that, Dahlia smiled sweetly. I've had an excellent teacher these past months, Mr. Reed. That drew a reluctant chuckle from him, followed by a wince as the movement pulled at his wound. Fair enough, he conceded. One more day. They passed the hours with Dahlia tending to Ryker's wound, making trips to the creek for water and gathering what food she could find. As the day progressed and Ryker's strength gradually returned, she finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind for weeks. Why did you leave, Ryker? Without saying goodbye, he was silent for so long that Dahlia thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, his gaze fixed on some point beyond the shack's weathered walls. I was getting too comfortable in Roswell, he said. Starting to want things I shouldn't. Like what? Dahlia pressed gently. His eyes met hers, storm gray and filled with an emotion she couldn't quite name. A home, a life beyond just surviving from one day to the next, someone to share it with. Dahlia's heart quickened. Those seem like perfectly reasonable things to want. Ryker's laugh held no humor. Not for a man with my past. What past? Dahlia moved closer, sitting on the edge of the cot. Ryker, I know almost nothing about you except that you used to be a Texas Ranger and now you scout for the Army sometimes. Whatever you're running from, it can't be so terrible that you don't deserve happiness. His expression darkened. Can it? You don't know the things I've done, Dahlia, the mistakes I've made, people I couldn't save. Then tell me, she challenged. Let me decide for myself if your sins are so unforgivable. For a moment, she thought he would refuse. Then, with a deep sigh that seemed to come from his very soul, Ryker began to speak. I was a ranger for 8 years, he said. Believed in what I was doing protecting settlers, maintaining some kind of order in a land that resisted it. Had a partner, James Holloway, best man I ever knew. We were like brothers. Dahlia remained silent, sensing that interrupting now would cause Ryker to retreat back behind his walls. 3 years ago, we were tracking a gang led by a man named Vicent Delgado. Dahlia's eyes widened. Related to his older brother, Ryker confirmed grimly. Vicent was worse, if you can believe it, killed without hesitation or remorse. Women, children didn't matter to him. Ryker's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles white. We finally cornered him and his men at a ranch they'd taken over. The family, he stopped, swallowing hard. The family was already dead, but we didn't know that. I wanted to wait for reinforcements, but James insisted we go in. Said every minute we waited was another minute those ranchers might be suffering. Dahlia could guess where this story was heading, and her heart ached for the pain evident in every line of Ryker's body. It was a trap, he continued, his voice hollow. They were waiting for us. James took 2 bullets meant for me, died in my arms while Vicent and his men escaped. Ryker's eyes, when they met Dahlia's, were haunted. His wife was expecting their first child, a boy he never got to see. I'm so sorry, Dahlia whispered, reaching for his hand. To her surprise, he didn't pull away. I hunted Vicent for months afterward, Ryker went on, became obsessed with it, finally tracked him to a border town in Mexico. There was a shootout. I killed him. His voice was flat, emotionless. Thought it would bring some peace, but it didn't. Just left me empty. So you left the Rangers, Dahlia surmised. Ryker nodded. Drifted for a while, took work where I could find it. Then I heard about Manuel and Rafael Delgado picking up where their brother left off. Started tracking them, trying to piece together their movements, figure out where they'd strike next. That's why you came to the New Mexico territory? Yes, their pattern led me here. I've been trying to gather enough information to stop them for good. Ryker's gaze was intense as it held hers. That's why I had to leave Roswell, Dahlia. I was getting distracted, starting to think about a future that can't exist until the Delgados are stopped. And you have to be the one to stop them, Dahlia asked. There are lawmen, Ryker pauses. You don't have to carry this burden alone. I do, he insisted. James died because of me, because I wasn't fast enough, smart enough. I owe it to him, to his wife and son, to finish this. Dahlia squeezed his hand. And then what? If you stop the Delgados, what comes next? The question seemed to catch Ryker off guard. I haven't thought that far ahead, he admitted. Maybe it's time you did, Dahlia said softly. You can't live your entire life atoning for something that wasn't your fault. Ryker looked away, but not before Dahlia saw the conflict in his eyes. She'd given him something to think about at least. It was a start. The next morning, Ryker's fever had broken completely. The wound was healing well, the infection receding under Dahlia's careful treatment. He was able to stand and move around the shack, though he tired quickly. "We'll leave for Roswell tomorrow," Dahlia declared as she changed his bandage one last time. "You should be strong enough to ride by then, as long as we take it slow." Ryker nodded, watching her hands as they worked with gentle efficiency. "You're good at this," he observed, doctoring. Dahlia smiled. "I've had excellent training. Dr. Green is a fine teacher, even if his methods sometimes seem unorthodox." "Is that why you came west, to learn medicine?" Dahlia secured the fresh bandage before answering. "Partly," she said. "After my parents died, I didn't have many options in Boston. My mother's family made it clear they considered me a burden. When Dr. Green wrote offering me a position as his assistant, it seemed like providence." "You never mention your father's family," Ryker noted. A shadow crossed Dahlia's face. "My father was disowned when he married my mother. She was a seamstress beneath his family's social standing, according to them. They never acknowledged me, even after his death." "Their loss," Ryker said simply. The warmth that spread through Dahlia at his words was both surprising and welcome. "Dr. Green knew my father in their youth," she continued. "They studied medicine together before my father gave it up to pursue business interests. The doctor never forgot their friendship, though. He's been like family to me since I arrived." "He's a good man," Ryker agreed. "One of the few who treated me like a person rather than just a gun when I first came to Roswell." "Is that why you kept coming back? Because of Dr. Green?" Ryker's eyes met hers, steady and serious. "At first, maybe, but not for the past several months." Dahlia's breath caught in her throat at the implication. Ryker, whatever she might have said, was cut short by the distant sound of hoofbeats. Multiple horses approaching fast. Ryker was on his feet in an instant, reaching for his gun belt. "Get your things," he ordered, all trace of the invalid gone. "Quickly." Dahlia didn't question him. She grabbed her medical kit and the few supplies they had, shoving them into her saddlebags while Ryker peered cautiously out the window. "Riders," he confirmed grimly. 5 of them. "And they're not army or ranchers." "The Delgados?" Dahlia asked, fear clutching at her heart. Ryker nodded once, his expression hard. "We need to go, now." They slipped out the back of the shack, Ryker moving with a fluid grace that belied his recent illness. Dahlia led her mare, which had been grazing nearby, following Ryker as he headed for a stand of scrub brush and boulders that would provide some cover. They weren't quite quick enough. A shout went up from the direction of the approaching riders. "There," a voice called in heavily accented English. "By the rocks," a shot rang out, the bullet striking the ground near Dahlia's feet. She gasped, stumbling backward. Ryker caught her arm, steadying her. "Get on the horse," he commanded, practically lifting her into the saddle. "Ride east toward those hills, don't stop." "What about you?" Dahlia protested, even as more shots kicked up dust around them. Ryker drew his revolver. "I'll hold them off, then follow." "No," Dahlia reached down, gripping his shoulder. "I'm not leaving you." For a moment, their eyes locked in a silent battle of wills. Then Ryker cursed under his breath. "Move over," he ordered, and when Dahlia shifted forward in the saddle, he swung up behind her with surprising agility for a man who'd been bedridden just yesterday. "Go," he urged, and Dahlia didn't need to be told twice. She urged the mare into a gallop, heading for the distant hills as Ryker fired behind them, his arm steady around her waist. The mare was strong but carrying double weight, and Dahlia knew they couldn't outrun their pursuers for long. Ryker seemed to realize this too. "There's a canyon ahead," he said in her ear, his voice raised to be heard over the pounding hooves. "Narrow entrance. Might give us a chance." Dahlia nodded, guiding the horse toward the gap in the rocky hillside Ryker had indicated. Behind them, the shouts of the Delgado gang grew louder, interspersed with gunfire. Most of the shots went wild, but one came close enough that Dahlia felt the wind of its passing. They reached the canyon entrance, the mare's sides heaving as she navigated the narrow passage. The walls rose on either side, providing some shelter from the gunfire. Once they were 100 yards in, Ryker directed Dahlia to stop. "Keep going," he told her, sliding down from the horse. "There's a trail that leads up and over the ridge. It comes out about 5 miles east of Roswell." "What are you doing?" Dahlia demanded, though she already knew the answer. Ryker checked his ammunition, his face set in grim lines. "Making sure you get away." "I'm not leaving you to face them alone," Dahlia insisted, dismounting despite Ryker's protests. "Dahlia, please." For the first time since she'd known him, Ryker's voice held a note of pleading. "I can't lose anyone else I care about to the Delgados." The admission hung in the air between them, momentous despite the dire circumstances. Dahlia stepped closer to him, cupping his face in her hands. "Then don't make me lose you," she said softly. "We'll find another way." For a heartbeat, Ryker seemed frozen by her touch. Then his hand came up to cover hers, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met," he murmured. A smile tugged at Dahlia's lips despite the danger. "So you've mentioned." The sound of approaching horses broke the moment. Ryker stepped back, his expression becoming calculating as he surveyed their surroundings. "There's a ledge about 20 feet up," he said, pointing to a narrow shelf on the canyon wall. "If you can get up there with the rifle, you'll have a clear shot at the entrance. I'll stay down here, draw their attention." It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was better than Ryker facing the gang alone. Dahlia nodded, retrieving the rifle from its scabbard on her saddle. Ryker helped her find footholds in the rough rock face, his hands steady at her waist as she climbed. The ledge was wider than it had appeared from below, offering decent cover while still providing a clear view of the canyon entrance. Dahlia positioned herself, the rifle ready. She wasn't the best shot, but at this range, with the gang forced to come through the narrow entrance, she didn't need to be below. Ryker led the mare deeper into the canyon, out of the immediate line of fire, then took position behind a large boulder. The wait seemed interminable, though it couldn't have been more than a few minutes before the first rider appeared at the canyon mouth. Dahlia held her breath, finger hovering near the trigger as Ryker had taught her during one of their afternoon shooting lessons outside Roswell. "Wait until you have a clear shot," he'd told her. "Don't rush it." The rider paused, scanning the canyon cautiously. Behind him, more horses and men appeared. Dahlia counted 4 in total, not the 5 Ryker had initially seen, which meant one was either injured or had been left to guard their rear. "Reed," one of the men called, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "We know you're in there. Come out now, and maybe we'll let the woman live." Ryker didn't respond, and Dahlia remained perfectly still on her ledge. The leader of the group, a man with a scarred face who Dahlia assumed must be either Manuel or Rafael Delgado, gestured for his men to spread out and advance into the canyon. The moment they passed beneath her position, Dahlia fired. The shot was deafening in the confined space, and one of the gang members cried out, clutching his shoulder as he fell from his horse. Simultaneously, Ryker opened fire from his position, hitting another man in the leg. Chaos erupted as the Delgados sought cover, their horses rearing and whinnying in panic. Dahlia worked the lever of the rifle, chambering another round as Ryker continued firing from below, forcing the gang to retreat toward the canyon entrance. One of the men made a break for the open ground, but Dahlia's shot caught his horse in the flank. The animal went down, trapping the rider beneath it. The Delgado leader shouted something in Spanish, and the remaining uninjured man grabbed the reins of the nearest horse and fled, leaving his comrades behind. Ryker emerged from cover, his revolver trained on the 3 remaining gang members. 2 were injured, and the third, the one trapped beneath his fallen horse, was struggling to free himself. "It's over, Delgado," Ryker called, his voice steady. "Tell your men to drop their weapons." The leader, Dahlia, could now see the family resemblance to Vicent in his features spat on the ground. "This is not over, Reed," he snarled. "It will never be over until one of us is dead." "That can be arranged," Ryker replied coldly, cocking his revolver. "Ryker, no," Dahlia called from her perch. "We need to bring them in alive." For a moment, she thought he might ignore her. Then slowly, he lowered his gun slightly, not putting it away, but no longer aiming directly at Delgado's heart. "You're lucky she's here," he told the gang leader. Now drop your weapons, all of you. With obvious reluctance, the Delgados complied. Ryker kept them covered as Dahlia climbed down from the ledge, then helped her collect the discarded guns. What now? She asked quietly. We can't take them all back to Roswell on one horse. Ryker's smile held no humor. We won't have to. Sheriff Parker and a posse have been tracking the Delgados for days. They can't be far behind. As if summoned by his words, a shout came from the canyon entrance. Hello, the canyon. Sheriff Parker here. Relief washed over Dahlia as a group of riders appeared, led by Roswell's grizzled sheriff. Within minutes, the Delgado gang members were disarmed, their wounds treated, and securely tied to their own horses. Sheriff Parker regarded Ryker and Dahlia with a mixture of exasperation and admiration. I've been chasing these varmints for a week, he said, shaking his head. Should have known you'd find them first, Reed. Actually, Ryker said, his hand coming to rest lightly on Dahlia's shoulder, they found us. The sheriff's bushy eyebrows rose as he took in Ryker's bandaged torso and pallid complexion. Looks like you've had quite a time of it. Miss Wilson, Doc Green's been worried sick about you. We're both fine, Sheriff, Dahlia assured him, though Mr. Reed could use a proper bed and some real food. I'll have one of my deputies escort you back to town, Sheriff Parker offered. The rest of us will take care of these three and track down the one that got away. Dahlia expected Ryker to insist on joining the pursuit, and she prepared arguments for why he shouldn't. To her surprise, he simply nodded. Thank you, Sheriff, he said. I believe I've done my part where the Delgados are concerned. The look he gave Dahlia as he spoke told her that his decision was about more than just his physical condition. Something fundamental had shifted in him, a burden lifted or at least set aside. The ride back to Roswell was slow but uneventful. Deputy Williams, a young man barely out of his teens, rode ahead while Dahlia and Ryker followed on her mare. Ryker's arms encircled her waist, his chest warm against her back. They spoke little, both lost in their own thoughts, but the silence between them was comfortable, filled with unspoken possibilities. Dr. Green was waiting on his porch when they arrived, his weathered face lighting up at the sight of them. He helped Ryker inside while Dahlia tended to the horses, then joined them in the doctor's kitchen where a pot of stew was already simmering. You look like hell, Reed, the doctor declared bluntly after examining Ryker's wound, but Dahlia did a fine job. Another week of rest and proper food and you'll be good as new. I've imposed on your hospitality enough, Ryker began, but Dr. Green cut him off with a wave of his hand. Nonsense, you'll stay here until you're healed. I've already prepared the spare room. The old doctor's eyes twinkled as he added, the one at the opposite end of the hall from Dahlia's. This is a respectable household, after all. Dahlia felt heat rise in her cheeks, but Ryker merely smiled and nodded his acceptance of the arrangement. Over dinner, they recounted their adventure for the doctor, who listened with keen interest, particularly to the parts involving Dahlia's medical treatment of Ryker's wound. You've learned well, he told her proudly. Though I hope you'll find less dramatic applications for your skills in the future. After the meal, Dr. Green excused himself, claiming fatigue though his eyes were alert and mischievous as he left Dahlia and Ryker alone in the kitchen. An awkward silence fell, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the mantel. I should thank you, Ryker said finally, for finding me, for saving my life. Dahlia looked up from the cup of tea she'd been staring into. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. Ryker leaned forward, his eyes intent on hers. You risked your life coming after me. Why? The directness of the question caught Dahlia off guard. She'd been prepared for Ryker to retreat behind his walls again, to pretend that the emotional revelations of their time in the desert hadn't happened. You know why, she said softly. Ryker shook his head slightly. I need to hear you say it. Dahlia set down her cup, her heart hammering in her chest. Because I care about you, Ryker, because the thought of you out there alone, possibly hurt or worse, was unbearable. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. I've spent 3 years running from the past, he said, convinced I didn't deserve a future. Then I met you, and for the first time I started to wonder if maybe I was wrong. Hope bloomed in Dahlia's chest, but she tempered it with caution. And now, what happens when you're healed? Ryker's thumb traced patterns on her skin, sending shivers up her arm. I've been offered a permanent position as deputy here in Roswell, he said. Sheriff Parker asked me before I left to track the Delgados. I turned him down then. And now? Dahlia prompted when he fell silent. His eyes, when they met hers, were clear and certain. Now I'm thinking I might accept, if I had a reason to stay. The invitation in his words was unmistakable. Dahlia turned her hand beneath his, linking their fingers together. I think you might find several reasons, she said, if you're willing to look for them. The smile that spread across Ryker's face transformed him, erasing years of hardship and guilt. He raised their joined hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent warmth spreading through her entire body. I'm looking, he murmured against her skin, and I'm finding them more appealing by the minute. Over the next week, Ryker's strength returned rapidly under Dahlia's care and Dr. Green's watchful eye. True to his word, he met with Sheriff Parker and accepted the position as permanent deputy. The town council, impressed by his role in capturing the Delgado gang, approved the appointment unanimously. Dahlia continued her work with Dr. Green, whose patients had grown to respect and trust her almost as much as they did the old doctor himself. In the evenings, she and Ryker would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson, talking of everything and nothing. They spoke of their childhoods, hers in Boston's refined society, his on a small ranch in West Texas. They discussed books they had read, places they had seen or hoped to see someday. Ryker told her about his time with the Rangers, the good parts that had been overshadowed by James's death, but were worth remembering nonetheless. Dahlia shared her dreams of perhaps opening a proper hospital in Roswell someday, with Dr. Green's guidance. What they didn't discuss was the growing tension between them, the way their hands would brush accidentally as they passed items at dinner, the lingering glances when they thought the other wasn't looking. Dr. Green observed it all with barely concealed amusement, but he maintained his role as chaperone with appropriate decorum most of the time. It was on a Sunday afternoon, nearly 2 weeks after their return to Roswell, that everything changed. Dr. Green had been called away to attend a difficult birth at her ranch several miles outside of town, leaving Dahlia and Ryker alone in the house for the first time since their return. They'd spent the morning at church, then walked together through Roswell's dusty streets, nodding to acquaintances and stopping occasionally to chat with townspeople who wanted to thank Ryker for his part in bringing down the Delgado gang. Now they sat in the doctor's small garden, a patch of greenery that seemed almost miraculous in the desert landscape. Ryker had been unusually quiet all morning, and Dahlia was beginning to worry that he was reconsidering his decision to stay in Roswell. When she finally voiced her concern, he looked at her with such surprise that she immediately felt foolish. Reconsider? No, Dahlia, that's not. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of nervousness. I've been thinking, but not about leaving. Then what? She asked, puzzled by his uncharacteristic hesitation. Ryker stood abruptly, pacing a few steps before turning to face her. I'm not good with words, he said. Never have been, but there are things I need to say to you and I want to get them right. Dahlia's heart began to race as Ryker knelt before her, taking both her hands in his. When you found me under that cottonwood, I was ready to die, he said bluntly. I didn't think I deserved to live, not after everything that had happened. But then you were there, saying you'd always come for me, and something inside me that had been dead for a long time started to wake up. His eyes, so often guarded, were now open and vulnerable as they held hers. I love you, Dahlia Wilson. I think I have since the first moment I saw you climbing out of that overturned stagecoach, your hair all wild and your eyes full of fire instead of fear. Dahlia's breath caught in her throat, tears springing to her eyes at the raw emotion in Ryker's voice. I know I'm not the man you would have chosen in Boston, he continued. I'm rough around the edges, I've got a past that will always be with me, and I can't offer you the kind of life you grew up with. But I swear to you, if you'll have me, I'll spend every day of the rest of my life trying to be the man you deserve. Ryker, Dahlia began, but he shook his head, needing to finish. I don't have much to offer except myself and a future we'd build together. I talked to Dr. Green before he left this morning, asked for his blessing to court you properly. He said, Ryker's lips quirked in a smile. Well, he said it was about time, and then he gave me this. From his pocket, Ryker withdrew a small velvet pouch. Opening it, he tipped a delicate gold ring into his palm. It was his mother's, Ryker explained. He said she'd want you to have it since you've become like a daughter to him. Dahlia stared at the ring, a simple band with a small pearl set in the center, then back at Ryker's face. Are you asking me to marry you? She whispered. I'm asking you to consider it, Ryker replied. I know it's sudden and you might need time. Dahlia cut him off by leaning forward and pressing her lips to his. It was their first kiss, sweet and tentative at first, then deepening as Ryker's initial surprise gave way to response. His hand came up to cup her cheek, gentle as if she might break. When they finally parted, both breathless, Dahlia smiled at the dazed look in Ryker's eyes. I don't need time, she said. I've known since I found you in the desert, perhaps even before that. Known what? Ryker asked, needing to hear the words. Dahlia took his face between her hands, her eyes shining with tears and joy. That I love you, Ryker Reed. That there's nowhere else I want to be except by your side. Ryker's smile was brilliant as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. For a long moment, they remained like that, savoring the certainty of having found in each other something neither had expected to find in the harsh New Mexico territory: a home, a future, a love worth fighting for. Their wedding, 3 weeks later, was a simple affair held in Roswell's small church. Dr. Green gave Dahlia away, his eyes suspiciously damp beneath his bushy eyebrows. Sheriff Parker stood as Ryker's best man, and it seemed the entire town turned out to witness the union of their new deputy and the doctor's capable assistant. Dahlia wore a dress of pale blue silk, ordered specially from Santa Fe and arriving just in time for the ceremony. Ryker, unrecognizable in a new suit, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked down the aisle toward him, her face radiant with happiness. The reception was held in the town square, with tables laden with food contributed by nearly every household in Roswell. There was music and dancing, and even Ryker, true to his promise to be the man Dahlia deserved, took his bride onto the makeshift dance floor for a waltz that left onlookers sighing with romantic approval. As the celebration continued into the evening, Ryker and Dahlia slipped away to the small house they would now call home, a wedding gift from the town council, in recognition of Ryker's service and Dahlia's contribution to the community's health. Standing on the porch, Ryker swept Dahlia into his arms to carry her across the threshold, a tradition she'd insisted upon despite his protests about his still healing wound. "Welcome home, Mrs. Reed," he murmured, setting her gently on her feet in the small but cozy front room. Dahlia smiled up at him, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Home," she echoed, the word holding all the promise of their future together. "I like the sound of that." Outside, the desert night fell over Roswell, stars appearing one by one in the vast New Mexico sky. Inside the little house at the edge of town, Ryker and Dahlia Reed began their life together, healing each other's wounds, sharing each other's dreams, finding in their unexpected love a strength neither had possessed alone. And when Ryker occasionally woke in the night, haunted by memories of the past, Dahlia would hold him close, whispering, "I'm here. I'll always be here." "You came," he would murmur, half asleep, echoing those first words beneath the cottonwood. And always her answer would be the same, "I always would." Years passed, and Roswell grew from a dusty frontier settlement into a proper town. Ryker continued as deputy until Sheriff Parker's retirement, when he was elected sheriff himself, a position he held with distinction for more than a decade. Dahlia, with Dr. Green's blessing and guidance, established Roswell's first proper hospital, a small but efficient facility that served the growing population of the region. their family grew as well. First came Robert James Reed, named for both Ryker's father and his fallen partner, a strong boy with Dahlia's gentle heart and Ryker's determined spirit. 2 years later, they welcomed Elizabeth Grace, who had her mother's beauty and her father's quiet strength. Their youngest, Thomas, arrived 3 years after that, completing their family and bearing an uncanny resemblance to his namesake, Dr. Green, who declared himself honorary grandfather to all 3 children. Life in the New Mexico Territory wasn't always easy. There were drought years when crops failed and cattle died. There were outbreaks of sickness that kept Dahlia working day and night. There were occasional threats from outlaws or tensions with the native tribes that required Ryker's steady hand and fair judgment. But through it all, they faced every challenge together, their love deepening with each passing year, with each obstacle overcome, with each joy shared and sorrow weathered. On their 20th anniversary, Ryker surprised Dahlia by taking her back to the spot where she had found him that scorching summer day. The old cottonwood still stood, its branches providing welcome shade in the desert heat. They spread a blanket beneath it, sharing a picnic lunch as they watched their children explore the nearby creek, now grown enough to be trusted with such adventures. "Did you ever imagine this?" Dahlia asked, leaning against Ryker's shoulder as they watched Robert teaching Thomas how to skip stones across the water while Elizabeth gathered wildflowers nearby. Ryker's arm tightened around her waist. "Not in my wildest dreams," he admitted. "I thought my life was over that day you found me." Instead, it was just beginning. Dahlia turned to look at him, this man who had become the center of her world. The years had added silver to his hair and lines around his eyes, but he was still as handsome to her as he had been on that first day, still able to make her heart race with a single glance. "No regrets?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Ryker smiled, the rare, full smile that had become less rare over the years but still made her breath catch. "Only that I wasted so much time running before I found you," he said, "or before you found me to be accurate." Dahlia laughed, the sound carrying across the desert landscape, causing their children to look up and wave. "Well, you certainly made up for lost time," she teased, nodding toward their brood. "Best thing I ever did," Ryker agreed, pulling her close for a kiss that, even after 20 years, still held all the promise and passion of their first. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, they gathered their children and belongings to head back to Roswell. Ryker helped Dahlia onto her horse, not the same mare from all those years ago, but a gentle palomino that had been his gift to her on their 10th anniversary. Before mounting his own horse, Ryker paused, looking back at the cottonwood tree that had witnessed the beginning of their journey together. In the dying light of day, it seemed to stand as a monument to the power of love to heal, to transform, to create a life neither of them could have imagined on their own. "Ready to go home?" Dahlia asked, reaching out her hand to him. Ryker took it, squeezing gently. "With you." "Always," he replied, and together they rode toward Roswell, toward the life they had built from the most unlikely of beginnings, a life that had started with a fever, a promise, and 2 words that had changed everything. Always would.